You recognize anybody in that? That's you, right?
That's me.
And what we did, showed that to the girl who was kidnapped. She goes, 100% certain as him. I've seen that face every night I go to bed.
In the winter of 1990, a woman was only steps away from her apartment along with her dog when she was approached by two men who seemed to want directions from her. When they got close enough, however, the men attacked and overpowered her, pointed a gun at her, and after knocking her out and sending the dog out into the bushes, dragged her to their nearby vehicle. It was Christmas Eve that night, and the woman was only 19 years old. When the men had the gun pointed at her, they threatened her repeatedly with violence and said that they would mutilate her, kill her, or throw her off of a cliff. At that moment, it seemed like there was next to no chance that she would get out of this ordeal alive. After dragging her into the car, they forced her to perform acts on themselves, taking turns holding her hostage at gunpoint. After this long and agonizing torture, she managed to show them pictures of a friend's child that she happened to have in her purse, convincing them that she was a new mother and that she was unable to identify them due to her eyes being hurt during the abduction. Because of this, they finally let her go, with one of the men saying that they were letting her go because it was Christmas and that it was her lucky day. She ran naked except for a jacket that had been thrown on her before a family took her in and called the police. When she was taken to the hospital, it was discovered by the doctor that she had a partially dislodged jaw, a dislocated shoulder, severely weakened hearing from head trauma, and multiple loose teeth. There was little to comfort her beyond the fact that she had at least managed to find her dog after the ordeal. But to make matters worse, she could not even take solace in knowing that the men had been caught and couldn't do what they had done to anyone else. In fact, it would be years before the perpetrators were discovered, and when they were found, it would be almost by pure chance. One of the criminals was a little-known mixed martial arts fighter by the name of Joe San, a man whose otherwise seemingly unremarkable career and personal life was secretly a front for this heinous act the entire time.
I've been referenced as Jane Doe for many years. I was kidnapped, I was tortured, and I was left for dead.
Joseph Young Min San moved to California at a young age after being born in South Korea. His childhood didn't seem particularly of note at first glance, and his fighting record frankly didn't either. He made his mixed martial arts debut early in the UFC in 1994 at UFC 4. He fought against Keith Hackney in a match that would become somewhat iconic for all the wrong reasons. San managed to take Hackney down during the fight, but Hackney retaliated by repeatedly punching San in the groin, which was a move that was legal at the time. San lost the match in the first round and would go on to become a bit of a laughingstock as a result of the fight. Following the fight, he decided to try his hand at kickboxing in a match against Japanese opponent Nobuaki Kakuta. Though there was no repeated groin punching this time around, he still lost in the first round, just like his first MMA fight. After this match, Joe-san took a years-long break from fighting, emerging again more than 5 years later in 2002 for 2 mixed martial arts fights in the Pride Fighting Championships and 1 fight in the Extreme Pancration. The first was in February of 2002, a match against Yusuke Imamura. In what had become a clear pattern, he lost in the first round. His second fight of 2002 was against Brazilian MMA fighter Joe Moreira, and this match is a bit of an iconic fight in its own right. Unfortunately for San, it was iconic for similar reasons to his groin punishment in his fight against Hackney. The San vs. Moreira fight has the distinct honor of being one of the only MMA fights to have its loser submit due simply to terror. Joe San was struck in the face once and had minor bleeding early in the match, and became so terrified that he refused to continue with the match. He essentially quit the fight, with the loss being chalked up to nothing but fear on his part. This loss happened, you guessed it, in the first round. For his final match, he fought Juke Nakajima in Tokyo in July of 2002. And once again, he lost in the first round, in under a minute in fact. This match would be his final one, as he seemed to quit MMA altogether following the loss. For those keeping count, this brought his career total to 0 wins and 4 losses, with him never lasting a match past the first round. As a matter of fact, he never even lasted a match for over 3 minutes. Joe, son, you suck. Right? We all know that this guy is horrible. Now, this story is about to get a lot more seedy. If you guys enjoy these kinds of documentaries, make sure that you subscribe and turn on post notification. And as always, leave a like. You're already here. You see where we're going. All right? So stay tuned. Let's get into it. For a while, Joe-san also worked as a professional wrestler. He wrestled Shinya Hashimoto at the All Japan Pro Wrestling Wrestle 1 event. But professional MMA and wrestling wasn't the only career that Joe-san gave a shot at. He also had an equally short-lived stint as a film actor. After a TV appearance in the series Reasonable Doubts, in which he played Mr. Lee, Joe-san made his film debut by first appearing in the 1993 film Joshua Tree alongside Dolph Lundgren. He had a villainous role in the film Shoot Fighter, Fight to the Death, and even played the primary antagonist in its sequel, aptly named Shoot Fighter 2. He has a couple other titles to his name, like Blood Fist 5 and Bad Blood, but if you do know of Joe-san as an actor, chances are that it's for one particular movie above anything else. In 1997, he appeared as the character of Random Task in the film Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, obviously parodying the henchman character Oddjob from the movie Goldfinger. The film itself was a massive success, far bigger than anything else San had been in by that time. The role wasn't massive by any means, but it was distinctly more high profile than anything he had done up to that point, probably including his career as a mixed martial artist and kickboxer. But it was also his last acting appearance. After the film, he seemed to give one final push into mixed martial arts a few years later for whatever reason. And once that failed, his film career never really took off again.
This is scary. You know, I can't tell you something I don't know.
Well, you do know, is it?
And you know, you say you have this evidence, you know, and it's scary.
If Joe-san were anything like the vast majority of people on Earth, this would be the point where he would fade into total and complete obscurity, not being known by anyone except those who vaguely remembered him for being hit in the groin repeatedly in his fighting debut, or perhaps him being scared of Joe Moreira to the point of submitting in the ring purely out of fear, or him parodying Oddjob in the Austin Powers film. But due to his actions before any of those things, fading into obscurity was not the fate that Joe-san had brought upon himself. Less than a decade after his final mixed martial arts fight, Joe would set off a chain of events that would make him famous for all the wrong, horrifying reasons. In May of 2008, Joe-san was arrested for and pleaded guilty to a charge of felony vandalism. On the surface, this was a relatively minor offense without too much to get extremely invested in. He was sentenced to 60 days in prison and probation time. In August of the same year, he was once again taken into custody after failing to report to his probation department and given an additional 90 days of jail time due to the probation violation. Due to the terms of this probation deal, it was here that a DNA sample was taken from Joe-san, one that linked him to an unsolved Christmas Eve 1990 case involving abduction and forcible sex. If he hadn't been arrested for the vandalism charge and failed to follow up on his probation period, it's likely that Joe-san would have never been caught for the 1990 case at all. San, along with his accomplice Santiago Lopez Gayton, was initially charged with 2 felony counts of forcible sex, 1 felony count of penetration by foreign object by force, 7 counts of forcible and even more depraved criminal actions. Based on these charges, he was facing over 200 years of prison time if given a complete conviction. However, the statute of limitations had expired on these initial charges. Instead, Joe-san was charged with torture and conspiracy to commit murder, both crimes without statute of limitations. He was found guilty of the torture charge and sentenced to life in prison. His accomplice, Santiago Lopez Gayton, was sentenced to 17 years in prison after pleading guilty to an array of charges. But even here, even after getting sentenced to life in prison, Joe-san's criminal actions weren't finished. In October 2011, San had been sharing his cell with another sex offender, a man named Michael Graham, who was serving 2 years due to failing to properly register his sex offender status in his county. It is only known to San what precisely happened and what kind of conversation or provocation took place between the two men, but whatever the case, Michael Graham was found dead in his bed when guards approached the cell. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. San was moved to solitary confinement following Graham's death and was subsequently charged with murder due to the event before being convicted of a reduced charge for manslaughter in 2017. He received a 27-year sentence, though he was serving a life sentence already. Suffice to say, I think it's likely that Joe-san will be behind bars for the remainder of his life. But even if that's obviously a good thing, it's important to keep what really matters here in mind. Knowing all of these details about this case and Joe-san's life is one thing, but it is important to keep this in perspective. The initial abduction and assault of the victim took place in 1990. Before being caught, Joe-san went on to have a career career, however short-lived, in film and in mixed martial arts, and was only caught because of a different crime he committed, which involved a plea that allowed authorities to take his DNA. Joe San lived the life of a free man after his heinous actions for so long that the statute of limitations on most of his crimes had expired by the time that he was caught and could finally be proven guilty. The victim had to live through over a decade of not knowing who had committed these horrifying crimes against her, with the knowledge that they were still at large and had the ability to do what they did to other women or even her again. Joe San has thankfully faced justice in the end, but we have to remember that the trauma and harm that these kinds of crimes cause don't just disappear when the bad guys are pushed behind bars, especially when it takes this long to find them.